recording.
This is the story reel for my short film, Fox and the Whale. Storyboarding and edit were parts of the craft I was honestly intimidated by, so working on this reel was also about overcoming some of these fears. There are small changes between this draft and the final film, but for the most part, it's really close. I'll walk through some of the thinking behind the film as the reel plays. Okay, here goes. The sound on the reel here is an early temp track, so it is not as finessed. They're really early sketches of ideas, placeholders for mood and tone. On the technical side, all the drawings are done in Photoshop, then brought into the edit in Premiere. This did bring up a problem, one of timing, or how to get a sense of time, how long essentially one of these shots need to be. You have flat drawings imported into an edit timeline, then a guesswork of how long to hold any single one of these images, and in turn, a shot. You can use music or dialogue to guide in creating a rhythm, but this being a nonverbal film and for soundscape relying on natural ambience, it became a bit tricky. So it was not as intuitive, and I kinda stumbled my way through it. I have since changed this workflow. For new projects, I'm storyboarding in an animation timeline with a lot more rudimentary posing. So what ends up coming into the edit is more close to moving footage. The advantage is now you can get a sense of rhythm to cut to, find an internal pulse almost. It's not absolute or perfect and still requires a lot of revision, but it has become more organic. One thing you might notice is the storyboards themselves are a bit more detailed and elaborate, and there's a reason for this. I was working on the reel solo, and there was a benefit in problem solving more generally, wearing a few different hats. So the boards also were the preliminary thinking ground for world building, scope, design elements, composition, lighting. The boards you see here are also a product of multiple iterations and revisions. Now, I was really unsure about trying my hand at this. Story and edit was new to me compared to, say, design. So the nagging fear was this is all going to stay really fragmented and not going to come together. The antidote was simply doing it one step at a time. You narrow in a little bit, one drawing at a time. Rinse, lather, repeat, and bit by bit, it took shape. There is a strange switch that happens when the puzzle of the problem becomes the pleasure, and the fear of it melts away. You start to build inroads into a different kind of thinking. You are laying tracks. It's no longer in search of images, but questioning why this image or another. Suddenly, there's a selection problem. A certain volume of material now puts you in a different mode, and a really fun one. You start making discoveries. The early seeds of the story was a tale of unrequited love, and not a whole lot came out of it. It remained in a state of limbo for a while. Over time, that transformed into chasing an idea that was all consuming, almost an obsession or something you could not put aside. Everything in your world suddenly seems to hint or point to this. Wedded into this was also a theme of leaving home, leaving the familiar, stepping out willingly past all you knew. On one hand, it reflected my interest in science and exploration and what it does in its pursuit to explain and understand. The other was my own personal journey pursuing a craft and eventually immigrating to a new country. Neither were explicitly stated, but they're woven in, maybe subconsciously. The film became about this pursuit of a curiosity, not so much a completion of a goal, but moving forward in spite of. I'm paraphrasing something I heard a while back, which always stayed with me. The purpose of dreams are not that they come true, but to remind you where dreams come from. I took that to mean moving away from the dream or goal, and instead shift the focus to the dreamer, to us, really, we who can create. If curiosity leads the way, there needn't be an arbitrary limit placed on how far or deep it can lead one. The most interesting puzzle lies ahead. The transition scene coming up is one that didn't make it to final. It had some cool opportunities both in design and sound, but it was a technical challenge at the time I just couldn't pull off. I made some headway with test shots, but overall, it never quite landed. Working on this film was my gateway into the world of sound design. I played with the idea for a sound logic for the picture. The dreamscape had a sonic sparseness. In contrast to that, the real world was lush and rich, and specific textures of that world came into focus as the story progressed. The dreams are the quiet spaces, and towards the end of the film, the real world adopts the stillness in sound. And the hope was it would make the final moment more reflective. Now, much of this sounds very lofty, and I have to confess, it really was stumbling in the dark a bit. But you are guided by strong feelings. Call it a preference, hopefully a sense of taste, some kind of internal metric. It might begin as something lofty, a very clinical theory, but then you get to test it, throw it up, and see if it sinks or swims. The process itself was not contained or constrained. Things always spilled over. Boarding would spark ideas for design, which in turn would make you dream up soundscapes. They all fed each other without defined boundaries. It was intentional to reserve music for the very end of the film. Music has a beautiful abstract quality, but can color things very quickly. The balance I was trying to play with was really employ restraint on when that entered into the picture. What I wanted to try was create something enveloping and immersive with sound design. A palette of real world sounds could toe that fine line without suggesting immediate emotionality. And hopefully, that restraint makes the music even more powerful when it finally plays at the end. John Poon was the composer of this beautiful piece, and I feel the music really elevates the tone here. Even though it doesn't meet up to a concrete end where all answers are given, I wanted to direct the feeling you're left with to be one of optimism, one of hope. Maybe a conclusion can be drawn that the whole journey ended in failure, but to me, the unknown ahead is still the journey worth staying on, and curiosity is a valid driver for it. I think this was the best place to pair the picture with music, to try and articulate that promise. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story reel and hearing a little bit about the process.